Hello, everybody. Getting ready to go live. It's been about 2 weeks. If you are new here, remember I am now doing videos every 2 weeks. I realized, I'm gonna tell you in a minute. Hold up. All right, so welcome to CreateCast. If you are new here, make sure you check out the guides up at the top. Go through the lessons from week one. I was doing videos every single week on all the possible topics that you ever could cover when it comes to podcasting. And so today I am going to do a different video, kind of similar to the other ones, but different because I decided to kind of go over some of the other videos that I did and really try to look at and figure out some of the things that can, halt a person, So I'm always in clubhouse rooms. I'm always trying to learn more, always trying to, get as much information as possible. So, but I realized that everybody is not like me. And everybody has, different things going on with them, has, whatever level of business their life is. So, for a lot of people, I'm starting to find out podcasting is a great idea or something that they're just extremely interested in, but they really think that it takes a lot of time. So, if I like to say, be a disaster before a master because a lot of people like to, they like the idea of being able to do X, Y, Z. You really don't understand the freedom that you have to have and create and be able to produce your own podcast because things like this is not, people in other countries really can't speak out, use their voice, or do things like this. So, for me, I really feel like podcasting and being able to speak on a mic and produce your own show completely, cultivate your own audience and make your own money is something that everybody doesn't get a chance to do. So sometimes we take it for granted. So tonight's topic is going to be for those who want to start a podcast, trying to get into a podcast, but is really, really at the bottom of your list because you're like, well, I can't really think of what I want to call my podcast, or I can't really come up with any ideas, or whatever the case may be. So, when I first started CreateCast, I told you guys I was going to be following along with you all, and we're going to do this together. And I noticed that even when you are considering yourself doing something with people, you can also, stop yourself from progress if you don't see other people with progress. So, I had planned to start my podcast within 4 weeks, have it up and running, start my batch processing, woo de woo woo. And so that's why I said I'm going to learn with you because when you learn with somebody or not really learn because I already knew what I was doing. But you know what I mean. I'm going to create a podcast with you. Then you can really see the timeline that people are dealing with that aren't like you. So I was like, let me stop bullying. Let me go ahead and start my podcasting. Let me start my batch processing. Let me stop playing. If you got 20, 30 minutes out the day, do a little recording. If I got a little extra whatever, do a little recording. And trust and believe if, you sat down and watched a 4 hour movie, you can sit down and record 2 or 3 episodes of a 30-minute podcast, to start your batch processing. So, just in case some people are feeling stagnant, it is quarter of the month. Some of y'all, I know y'all got y'all stimmy, whatever the case may be, if you want to start a podcast, get it started now. Don't catch FOMO, and you know what FOMO is. You know, what is FOMO? Feeling, oh, um, somebody used that phrase earlier, so I was like, Let me see how I can find, you know, figure out what FOMO is. But kind of like the fear of being left out or something like that. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and get in this topic again. Like I said, I am going to keep it short and sweet tonight. You guys can watch this video when you get a chance. Watch it on replay. So tonight's topic is going to be all about topics and ideas. How to come up with topics. There you go, boo. Fear of missing out. That's what it is. Same difference. Fear of missing out. So when it really, because like I told y'all before, podcasting has a very is not as big as YouTube. Everybody want to start a YouTube channel, but it's gonna take you at least a year or two, depending on your content, to even build up that following. But podcasting right now, if you want to get into it right now, this is the best time to get into it right now. Whatever it is, even if it's a 20-minute podcast, the average person only listens to 3 to 5 minutes of a podcast. So even if you do have a short podcast, that's fine. Don't think that you got to sit and talk on a mic for a whole hour. A podcast is you. A podcast is everything that only you want to do. So if I want to do 10 minutes a day, I do 10 minutes a day. You know? If I want to do 20 minutes or 30 minutes on my next episode, then that's what I'll do. This is the freedom of podcasting. You got to understand that. So I always say, one of my favorite sayings is procrastination always leads to stagnation. You're going to keep procrastinating. Next thing you know, it's going to be 2023, and you're going to be like, I wanted to start a podcast and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but you didn't. Trust and believe. Again, I'm not speaking from the outside. I'm speaking from the inside because that's what I did. I wish I would have kept podcasting when I started in 2017. I would have been like consistently doing my podcast. I would have built a huge following. It would have been awesome. It would have been great. But so tonight is topics and ideas for your podcast. Because I realize that a lot of people might be stuck because they want to start a podcast and it seems really interesting, you know, but they really always think that it's hard to come up with these topics. So the great thing about podcasting is it's all you. So whatever you come up with is your prerogative, plain and simple. So first, let's go into how to come up with your title for your podcast. So I'm going to relate some of this to me because, again, I told y'all I was going to go through the steps with y'all and start a podcast. I'm already trying to put together 2 or 3 other podcasts and creating podcasts for other people for some of my clients now. So I'm going to take you guys a little bit through the process that I went through, but also give you some tips and probably try to drop some links in the comments. So first thing first, how to come up with your title. So when you come up with a title for your podcast, you want to definitely make sure that you keep it short. I've been in a lot of clubhouse rooms. I'm in a podcast clubhouse room like every other day, y'all. Like they literally have Club Pod, literally associated with the podcast magazine, literally has a clubhouse room going on every day. And one of the really good things that they always talk about is your podcast title. Making sure you keep it in short and sweet, but also making sure it relates to what you're talking about. So being simple and sweet means to basically just be direct, okay? Just say exactly what it is. Don't try to make people have to make their mind jump through hoops to try to figure out what your podcast is. I am in this podcast group called Podcast Nation, and a woman said she literally had a podcast, and it was like super long name, like Destination, Dreams and Thinks and Thought Topics or something. It was like really long. And she said she changed the title of her podcast. I mean, I don't mean she started a new one. She literally just changed the topic of her podcast. And she said her listenership doubled just based off her name. Just based off the name of it. Because people don't want to have to think hard about names. Like, I see a podcast and it's called Butterfly Wings. Huh? Like, are you talking about butterflies or insects? Or is butterfly wings this special, like, symbol word that means a free A free ride podcast where you talk about freedoms and living off the grid. I don't know. Like you want to be short and simple, but you also want to make sure that your podcast makes sense. Either if you get a short explainer or a long explainer. I've heard some people in the clubhouse room, and they say the name of their podcast, and they go through a whole explanation, and I'm like, I heard mama and I heard kids. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, no. Sometimes, you could tend to do super long names or super long explanation if you're overthinking it. People do not realize it that we all have issues with overthinking stuff and not doing something until we're perfect. Everybody wants to wait to perfection. I want to make sure I got the best mic and I got the best cameras. I don't know why you need a camera. Best audio system, best laptop, best this, best that. Why? They are literally creating podcast apps on phones. You don't have to wait till you're the best to do anything. So come up with a name, short and sweet, and guess what? If it don't work for you and you want to kind of switch your name up later, because maybe you get really smart later and you want to create something different later. Not smart later, but you know what I mean. You probably, maybe today you're thinking, let me just start a podcast and I'm going to call it, Chatting with Prina. And then like a few months later, I'm like, I'm starting to think I want to name my podcast The Sit Down with Prina, or something like that. So definitely make sure you keep it short and sweet. For a good example would be if I was to make a podcast about food, then, it would be, Eating with Jill or Snack Attack with Mac. If my name was Mac, but it ain't Mac, thank God. But Snack Attack with Mac or something like that. But you don't want to make a food podcast that says things I like to eat on Sunday with wine. Or like, what? Like, I get that this is a food podcast, but ma'am, ma'am, that's too long. We want to make sure that we keep it short and sweet. So, a really, really good number, 75% of like all podcasts literally are 29 characters or less. So if you create a podcast, try to keep it on 29 characters. I mean, again, this is from my research. Again, I like to keep mine short and sweet. As you know, I call my podcast the first semester, and first semester is supposed to relate to school because you only have semesters in school. School relate to teachings, so lessons. So you don't really have to be a rocket scientist how to figure out what that podcast is going to be about. So next up, I would say a play on words. Podcasts that have a play on words, oh my God, those are the best ones. This guy posted his podcast today, and I don't really care what the podcast was about, but I actually might listen to it just because he came up with a clever name. And I know this might sound kind of cheesy, but it was kind of like On the Mic. The name of his podcast is On the Mic, but not MIC, MIKE, because his name was Mike. But I know, y'all. I know that's lame, but that's kind of sweet. Like, I get that his name is Mike, but also, like, a microphone implies music, art, vocal. It's going to be art, comedy. Anybody who uses a mic, that's what that podcast is going to be about. So I thought that was a really, really jazzy name. But there's other names I looked up. There's one called Wardrobe Crisis. So we already know of all the super fails in life. So we know that podcast is going to be about fashion. The one that I listen to all the time, my favorite podcast, is the Side Hustle Pro, which is basically a podcast that's all about side hustles. And the girl interviews people who turn side hustles to full-time jobs, but also her side hustle, which a podcast is a really good side hustle, and you can actually turn it into a full-time job. So you want to think of a play on words. like that. And so for example, I mean, you want to make sure, just make sure it's understandable. You don't want to make something that's completely off, like my butterfly example. Like, no, no, still don't know what that podcast is about. Anyway, so two rules I would suggest and I would live by is do not use podcast in your podcast name. It's redundant. It really is. It's like me saying, um, this is a cheat. No, no, it's not a good example. This is I just made me uh, pineapple. Like you're saying the same thing twice. So don't say something like rapping on a mic, a podcast, or running a dream podcast. Like you just want to call it running a dream. You only want to use the word podcast if you're telling somebody about it, or or if it's something like the second line of the podcast, like a dairy podcast. I don't know. I just came up with that. So you definitely want to make sure your podcast name is not redundant, and then of course you want to avoid explicit words in the title because it may or may not be hard to get it approved. You know how the world be unless you're somebody super famous, but you don't want to be like stepping in I don't like to cuss at all, but stepping in with Jill or the podcast that word. You don't want to put these explicit words. Yeah, I'm crazy. Y'all don't want to put these explicit words in the title of your podcast. If you have a brand already, you definitely I'm gonna drop some names of some generators in the comments so you guys can just look at these later. But if you have a business or a company, you definitely want to try to see if you could brand your podcast with that business name or company. So, for example, I would say, I love to use my friends as an example. So I'll use my friend Shanita as an example. So my friend Shanita, hey girl, whenever you watch this, girl, my friend Shanita has a company where she basically is a creative. She does like graphics, t-shirts, or more than t-shirts. She does anything you want to be personalized. She can do that, right? But she's also a mommy and an entrepreneur. So if she was to create a podcast and the name of her company is Dream On or Do Dream On, and then her followers are like dreamers. So if she was to come up with a podcast, which would really, 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 really be great, that podcast will be called the Do Dream On or Do Dream On. She wouldn't say Do Dream On podcast, but she'll just call it, Dream On podcast, Dream On, not podcast. It's such a bad habit to keep saying podcast. But she would call it Dream On or The Dreamer or Dreamer, Dreamer, just in general. Something that incorporates that company name. And then she would talk about, being a mommypreneur, talking about starting businesses, interviewing other people that started businesses, talking about how it is to be a creative and the research and stuff it goes into being creative and how you got like all this stuff would be different topics that she can probably go on forever because it relates to her business. So I always say that I think anybody and everybody can start a podcast no matter what it's about because there's always an audience for you out there. There's always an audience that can either be developed or cultivated from you, something that something that you love or like to do. That can definitely be created. So that was just an example using somebody I actually know. But let's say somebody my stepfather, he has a lawn service. He'll never start a podcast, but if he started a podcast, his podcast will literally have to be somewhere on the lines about lawn care and maybe I would say dealing with customers, clients, face-to-face sales or something like that because it relates to his business. And then the good thing, like I've told you guys in the other training about how to make money podcasting, when you create podcasts like this that are branded with your name, like Pepsi could come out with a podcast tomorrow and heavily like promote it, and people would associate Pepsi name with that podcast and probably listen to it if they're talking about business, because Pepsi has been in business since what, the 50s and 60s. So if Pepsi came out with a business podcast, you ain't gonna listen to it? Yes, you probably will. So having a branded podcast is definitely a really, really good idea, because you can always put a call to action at the end of your podcast saying, hey, if you want to check out any of the items that I talked about today, or if you want to check out my designs, you can go check it out at such and such and such.com, or the lawn service. If you're interested in, this special weed cutter that I was talking about today, I make it myself, and you can go find it at such and such and such.com. So, like, right now, I'm doing a podcast that has nothing to do with me, but eventually, I'm probably going to start another podcast for my business. Well, let's say my business is Prina Media Services. Then my podcast will be all about media, from news to TV to podcasts, creating TVs, creating movies, creating anything dealing with a camera or a mic. That would be a Prina Media podcast, and that's what it would all be about. And I probably call it something like pre-media. Get it? Not Prina, but pre-media. Anyway, so I'm going to drop a name generator in the comments. Give me 1 second. If you guys are interested in trying to, use a little technology to do your podcast or figure out a podcast name, then you could definitely use any of those name generators. You can just Google them. Yeah, some of them say Shopify or business generator, but what I just say, business names can be podcast names and vice versa. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on down my list. And yes, y'all, I got a list because I made this list of everything I'm talking about 5 minutes before this live started. Anyway, next up is if you finally come up with a name, y'all didn't research, you didn't brainstorm, you like, yes, child, I got my name, I'm all set. Make sure you Google it. As soon as you Google it and you find out that somebody else got your name, you're going to be mad. You're going to be like, who is this that got my name? Why they choose the name that I didn't slave over this name and whoop-de-whoop-whoop. So this is where we talk about my story, because I went through that. And I was like, man, because I had been talking about this idea for a podcast for months with my husband. Like, we was going to do it together, and then I was like, he playing games. I'm going to just do it myself. He could be a guest sometimes. But I'm like, for months, I was talking about creating a podcast about all the stuff we had to figure out on our own, all these lessons we had to figure out on our own. Just stuff you just ain't gonna never ever learn from a parent, and like your kids won't even learn from you. Like, literally, this is what the podcast is gonna be. And I was like, I'm gonna make it called Stuff Your Mama Never Told You. And then I was gonna use the cussing word, which is one of the rules you don't want to use. And I was like, stuff your mama didn't tell you, stuff your parents didn't tell you, stuff your grandma didn't tell you, little stories your grandma told. Like, I went through a whole family, second cousin twice removed, what they didn't tell you. Like, I went through all this stuff. I'm like, cool, it's going to be stuff your mama didn't tell you, stuff my mother never told me. Looked it up, and it's like 4 or 5 podcasts with the same name or similar. And I was like, you know what? This ain't going down. This ain't happening. So I had to do the same thing that I had to do when it comes to coming up with titles or topics to talk about. I had to do the same thing when it came to me trying to figure out what my title was going to be. So I sat down and I said, the old school journalism rules: who, what, where, when, and why. Who is my podcast for? My podcast is for people in my age range. We are millennials. I'm an older millennial, but we are millennials. So that's the who, right? What is my podcast going to be about? Life lessons, stuff we didn't learn, a lot of the internet, because if you think about it, the millennial generation, we really came about and was born in the age of computers, and then the discovery of Wi-Fi throughout the little AOL CDs, age of Wi-Fi, age of social media networks. Like, we done been through a lot, y'all. We still standing and we still here. So I had to think about who, what, where. So where is this based? Of course, America. Who, what, where, when, now, in the past. So that makes it really evergreen, meaning I could pre-record all my episodes and it's always going to work all the time because it's evergreen. I'm not talking about the news that happened yesterday, and I'm not talking about anything that's current, so I don't have to worry about the episode being old or something like that, or people being able to tell what time it is in the podcast, even if they listen to it 3 or 4 years later. Who, what, where, when, why. And so, why am I creating this podcast? I'm creating this podcast because I want people to kind of, before they go out there and have to learn their own lessons, they can get a lesson from me and what I had to go through. So, once I wrote all that down, and I was like, you know what? Life lessons is like a teacher, its own teacher. Life is a teacher. And so, what do you learn at school? Schools. But I had to learn different things in different sectors. Oh, there you go. First semester. Semesters. And each episode is going to be a chapter, like a chapter in a book. Okay, y'all get it. So that's how you have to go through this whole brainstorming process when it comes to trying to figure out a name for your podcast. If that seems like a lot, just look at the generators I posted in the comments. But at some point in your life, y'all gotta stop saying that's too much and just do the most. Okay, it's okay. Do the most. So next up, we're just gonna jump right into the idea of how to find topics. So I'm going to give you some examples of how I find topics. And then I'm also going to drop an article in the comments that kind of helps you and gives you a hint about how you can, come up with topics, like exercises you can do to come up with topics. So I'll come up with that. Things you can do to get inspired about topics. So how to find topics. Again, same way I found the title. Do some brainstorming. But with this brainstorming, you want to think like, what are some things that I want to talk about? What am I a genius at? What am I, really interested in, And then I'm going to think about what I don't know about that topic that I'm thinking about. So let me use mental health as an example, right? So we all know that mental health is a really big thing now. It used to be a faux pas, or in some areas it's still a faux pas. But let's say we talk about mental health, right? And the growing of it or the ungrowing of it, whatever. Mental health is what I'm interested in. So therefore I start to write down all the different topics of mental health. Even people that might not only have mental health issues, but also handicap issues. Okay, so now I've branched off my topic to mental health and handicap, right? Then mental health on top of, physical health problems, physical. So like all these things, multitude of ideas start to come about, all about because of mental health. And I would start those episodes talking about, my history of mental health, or if I had a history of mental health, or somebody I probably had to deal with in life, stories of that mental health, and the first time I seen whatever. So these are just examples. I'm not crazy. I don't have mental health, but nothing's wrong with going to see a mental health professional. So that's why podcasts like this are actually really, really popular, because sometimes people aren't always comfortable talking to somebody. And sometimes these podcasts, just like music sometimes, actually help people when they are going through some things. So that alone would be so many topics. And so I would talk about everything I know, and then I would find other people that do know or research it, and then talk about the research that I found about mental health. So that's how you will clearly break it down piece by piece. And I mean, just right now, I probably came up with a good 10 to 12 topics. And if you think about 10 to 12 topics to talk about on a mental health podcast, and we're doing every other week, that's 2 a month, 12. I didn't already came up with 6 months of my podcast. Like, that's how you have to break it down. And once you break it down and you can see it on paper, then you're going to be like, oh, this ain't nothing. Bam, I know what to talk about. I didn't already pre-wrote my ideas that I sat down on a nice quiet day for 20 minutes and brainstorm about. It's going to be easy. It's going to be nothing. So another way that you can do this, another tip is to think about all the questions that you have in life, right? And so that's kind of like how I came up with mine. I'm like, why my mama never told me, how to move out the state? Why my mama never told me that all I had to do was go to the court and like the police won't show up and I won't get a ticket. Like, start asking yourself these questions, and it's just like, and that's how I was like, wait a minute, it's a lot of shit I had to learn on my own, and I had to Google it. Like, why, mama, why? So then, therefore, a podcast idea was born. So that is a way that you can come up with topics, is to literally sit down and think about all the questions that you have in life and try to figure out how to find an answer to them. Or how they can be answered, or if other people can answer them. If other people can answer those questions that you have, that's your interviewer. That's who you're going to talk to. That's who you're going to reach out to and chat with them a little bit to be on your podcast. So some good examples is, how does someone get into beekeeping? Like, is that just an inherited job, or can I apply for this? Is there bee school? Things like this. So next thing you know, I'm going down this whole tunnel of what are some other jobs that I never hear about? Like, bam, I came up with an idea, a podcast about weird jobs, interview those weird people at those weird jobs, and then talk about my research into these weird jobs. Like what? Bam, you didn't create a whole podcast all because you sat down and was thinking about the questions that you have about life. You see how easy that is? It's so easy for you to just sit and think about ways to come up with a podcast. So another way for me is I think about the things that interest you. For me, I just like to talk, and I like the media, and I like podcasting, and so that's the stuff I talk about. Those are the things I'm interested in. Those are the things I am a personal expert in. So those are the things that interest me. But if you have something like music or sports, hair, fashion, gossip, I don't know. I heard these two guys in this group I'm in. They literally both have podcasts about cryptozoology. And yes, I know what cryptozoology is because it is the study of weird animals or animals that may or may not exist, and like aliens. And I'm interested in that stuff too. So, like, if you're interested in weird stuff like that, then all these things that you're interested in, all these things that are of interest to you, can become your podcast. And you're not obligated. It's your podcast. You don't have to do a podcast every week. You don't have to do a podcast every 2 weeks. Hell, you can make 12 episodes, make them an hour long, and do 12 episodes for the whole year. Come back next March, next April, and get ready to post your next 12 episodes. It can literally set it and forget it. Say what you had to say. If you're a school administrator, if you're a teacher, if you have special topics that you want to talk about, I always thought this was a good idea because not only are you getting free views, right? Easy advertisement, but like teachers and professors should literally take pieces of their lectures and make a podcast out of it. Like, bro, you're teaching twice a week, once a week, every week. That's a podcast. If your school not paying you enough, pay yourself. Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, anybody who spends a lot of time speaking and talking, those pieces can be ripped and turned into a podcast. So I say do that. If you're a reporter, maybe you had chat with the person behind the scenes, and your podcast can be about that behind the scenes conversation, right? Behind the scenes news behind the rope. there's no rope in the news, but you guys get what I'm saying. So there's so many creative ideas that you can sit and think about how to come up with topics for your podcast. News, rumors, myths, social media, like anything can literally be a topic. If you just want to talk about shoes, you could talk about people who work in shoes, people who design shoes, people who start shoe businesses. You can talk about how you getting your first pair of, I don't know, $200 shoes made you feel. Like all these things you can literally chat about, and it could be a podcast, and you can make money from that, and you can branch it off into all these other levels of things. So for me, three things of inspiration when I have done a lot of my brainstorming, I've sat and wrote. I think if I got an example right here, y'all think I'll be playing. I'm about to show y'all. Podcasting notes. Can y'all see this? Yeah, I got pages in here of notes. Notes for days. Of me just sitting here. Again, y'all seen this list before. All my titles. I sat down and wrote down like 55 topics of stuff that I think my mama never taught me and that I had to figure out on my own. And I just sat here and start writing. The best exercise you can do sometimes is to just sit and write about all types of things and then organize it after you write it all the way down. I'm all showing y'all my scribble. So, three things I use for inspiration: music, movies, and friends. And yes, I said movies because sometimes I'll be watching movies like, wait a minute, why they or how they? Oh, that's And so that's a good way to come up with some topics. So I am going to drop another link in the comments that is a idea podcast topic generator. Podcast. Hold up, let me type it in for y'all. Okay. Podcast topic generator is basically what y'all want to look into. I would suggest just doing what I told you, but there is a podcast topic generator and there is a podcast title generator. Like, it's 2021, y'all. You really ain't got to do nothing for you. Like, you really ain't got to do nothing for you. You can even if you ain't want to do all the stuff I taught you for free, how to do by yourself, you can literally go on Fiverr and pay somebody to start and create a podcast for you. And it's that easy and that simple. And when you start to realize and find out that it is really that easy, it is really that simple, and you're going to be like, why wasn't I doing this all this time? And what was I doing all this time? Shameless promo. Why wasn't I doing this all the time? And blah, blah, blah. It's going to simply be because you were procrastinating that led to stagnation. I tried to rhyme. Anyway, I'm going to keep that short. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you are doing your podcast. I hope you're trying to do a little bit of it, even if you're just in an extremely long research segment. I'm going to be back in 2 more weeks with another podcast related video. Every week I think of something new. I actually got another way to make money on podcasts that I think I'm going to talk about in 2 more weeks. After I dig deep into the research about it, I'm going to come back and give that information to you guys for free. So make sure you guys go through the whole list of like videos. You want to start from week 1. If you literally follow those videos, I promise you not. Follow those videos that I already pre-recorded live. Write your notes, write your tips, do the homework that I assign in each video. You can be up and running your podcast in no time. Even if you watch all them videos in one weekend, that will be all the research that you need to do because I did it all. Trust me. Don't forget to check out the files. In the files is a free podcast script and calendar. I created a full-on way for you to write down your script, write down your social handles, even put together social media, um, social media calendar. Write down the calendar for your, like, all that is right up in which way? This way. Right up in the files in that left corner, so you guys can actually download those files. And if you're still looking for mics, again, I told you, record that podcast on that phone. Stop playing. Ain't nobody gonna know. Nobody's gonna know. They're not gonna know. They ain't gonna be able to tell. But I got a list of microphones. Use your stimmy, buy a little microphone, but you can use your phone. I done showed y'all the example on how to use your phone. Everything you need, and your podcast checklist. Remember, I have it all in the files folder at the top in the files, for you to download to your computer. So get it together, child. Get it together. Start your podcast today. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'm going to go ahead and end this video. Talk to you later. That's what my mama say. Lord Jesus. Anyway, see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching. Create Cast on Facebook.